Accessing.
When TV and radio collide.
Love it.
Wow. This is what you get. You're listening to JJ and Alex, presented by G2G Bars.
Don't touch that dial.
On 97.5, the KSL Sports Zone.
Welcome back, everybody. It is JJ and Alex. Happy Monday afternoon to you. Alex Keary, Jeremiah Jensen. The program is always brought to you by G2G Bars. All natural ingredients and no preservatives make the G2G Bar perfect for anybody who needs a quick, tasty, and nutritious boost. You can find them at Costco, Holiday Oil, Maverick, Associated Foods, popping up also in the refrigerated sections at a grocery store near you. So just find them. JJ, we got some breaking news from the Eastern Conference Semifinals news desk. JJ, What do you have?
Donovan Mitchell out tonight with the calf strain. Will not play in Game 4, Cavaliers versus Celtics. It's going to be that's a big loss. He's averaging nearly 30 points in the playoffs. Not going to play. That's a home game for them. They want to even the series. They go down 3-1 to the Celtics. It's probably lights out, and they're going to have to do it without Donovan tonight.
Maybe it's for the best.
Wow.
Just kind of send you off into the sunset of the offseason.
Little Ewing theory going on there with Donovan Mitchell and the Cavs, you think?
Get it going quick here. Say, hey, you know what? We'll catch you next year. We'll be back at it. We're going to fight it, but this year we don't got it. So Donovan Mitchell out for tonight. He was listed as questionable. I just assume when guys are listed questionable with like a calf strain, I go, he's playing. But no, not going to happen. There you go. By the way, we're going to jump in with the cut right here. We, of course, have been doing our opponent previews across the board. This is one of those nice double dips. And now that Utah and BYU are in the same conference, although this is not a conference game for Utah technically, which is a wild thing still to consider. But here we are. Let's jump in here, get our opponent previews, and let's jump in with the cut right here.
It's time for the biggest story of the day. This is what made the cut with JJ and Alex on 97.5, the KSL Sports Zone.
The cut brought to you by an incredible selection of Kia, Subaru, Chevy, Jeep, Dodge, or Ram. Visit Doug Smith dealerships in American Fork and Spanish Fork. Great service starts with great know-how, and nobody knows like Doug and the Doug Smith dealerships. Zach Smith joining us right here. Waco Tribune is where you can find his byline. Baylor football is who he covers. Zach, thanks for being with us, man. This is nice. We don't have to make a bunch of extra phone calls this year. So many similar opponents or same opponents with Utah and BYU now that the Utes are in the Big 12. Although it's not a conference game. How is Baylor football shaping up now that they have a new offensive coordinator?
Yeah, I mean, you kind of thanks for having me. First of all, I appreciate it. Never a bad time to talk about college football. Yeah, Baylor. There's lots of change. I mean, you hit it right there. New offensive coordinator, head coach Dave Aranda taking over kind of play calling duties on the defensive side of the ball, and yeah, really, like you said, new offensive coordinator Jake Spavital. He spent time as head coach at Texas State, kind of going from a wide zone that Jeff Grimes now at Kansas ran to a kind of a spread, up-tempo, fast, speed, all of those buzzwords that are kind of what you expect from, high-tempo college football teams. That's what you can expect from Baylor this year. It's a big change. There's been a lot of learning this spring, and, we'll see how it all turns out in the fall. Week 2 against Utah, that's the first real test for Baylor, so we'll see what they look like. It's going to be different, I'll say that.
Well, you can only make so many changes on the coaching staff before you have to look at the head coach himself. Does Dave Aranda, is he on the hot seat in Waco, and what's the situation with that?
Oh, that's 100. He is. He knows he's on the hot seat. He is absolutely on the hot seat. I think, Mack Rhodes, the athletic director, I think it would take kind of a repeat of last season for them to actually pull the trigger and let him go. There was so much youth on last year's team, and I know that I might sound like a Baylor mouthpiece here, but, there was so much freshmen and youth on last year's team that made so many of those freshman mistakes coming up from the high school level at the Power 5 level that, that's what you expect from the young guys. And so I think another year under their belt playing at this top level, I think they're going to be improved. But I think that if they get to a bowl game, if they finish 6-6, which I think is very much in the purview for Baylor, I think that saves Dave Aranda's job. If they show improvement, then that will save Dave Aranda's job. And he definitely knows he's on the hot seat, and he's kind of changed this spring. He's become much more rough, grumpy, a football coach. People look at Dave Aranda, they will hear Dave Aranda, and they just think about his voice, and it's just so calm and peaceful. He doesn't sound like a football coach. He still sounds like Dave Aranda to a degree, but he sounds much more grumpy this spring. That's the best way I can describe him.
Texas and Oklahoma, of course, on the way out of the Big 12, and new faces in the Big 12 this year with Utah and Colorado and the Arizona schools. Utah, of course, is the best team out of those four, likely, and a team that is not to be reckoned with, especially at their home up on the hill at Rice-Eccles Stadium. So this is not just a challenge. This is like a really, really tough challenge right off the top there. It's not a conference game, which is probably good news for Dave Aranda and his guys. But what have you looked at and seen at Utah that they do that could really, really be a problem for Dave Aranda and Baylor football?
Well, I know, especially watching them last year, I'm not exactly sure how much they lost along the line of scrimmage. I know they were dominant last year. They were really good in that front. And that is where Baylor is struggling on both sides of the ball, defensive line, offensive line. That is where the biggest question mark from a personnel standpoint, that's where Baylor is going to take its biggest step, or hopefully take its bigger step, is along the line of scrimmage. And I know Utah traditionally has always been really good up front on both sides of the ball. So I think that can be a lopsided affair up front if the Utes can just, who knows? Baylor is going to piece together an offensive line and piece together a defensive line. And I think, Utah can probably manhandle them if things are traditionally like they are. But,
I'm just taking a quick look at the schedule. You've probably studied it more than I have, I'm sure. Missing Utah and Kansas State in conference play is a huge benefit, but there's some tough ones. Oklahoma State at home, at Texas Tech, at Iowa State. Do you believe this schedule will help them, or is this a schedule that's really tough?
I think that's a difficult question. I think that it's good for them that they start on the road at Colorado. I know we all know what Dion is going to be like and what that's really their first home Big 12 conference game. But I think if there's a road game to have in this conference, other than maybe Houston, that's probably the one. Aside, antics aside, on the field, that's probably the one. So I think that it sets up well for them to maybe spring one upset and kind of win the games you're supposed to. So I think it's, like you said, missing out on Kansas State where they went last year and got smoked, and then having that Utah game not be a conference game, those are probably the best two teams in the conference, right? And so for that to not be on Baylor's schedule, I think that gives them even more optimism than they already have coming out of spring football.
BYU is familiar, of course, with the offensive coordinating of Jeff Grimes, and so he left BYU to go to Baylor, and then now ends up at Kansas. And in the end, this BYU and Baylor team, they're both kind of right around one another when it comes to offensive production, and that is massive question marks, obviously, for both teams on the offensive side of the football. And that's a real weird place, I think, for both teams to be, because they've typically been the high-scoring, kind of obviously the passing the football kind of focus of those teams a lot of times. And so in the case of BYU and Baylor, those are teams that are in most power rankings in that 12, 13, 14 kind of range. Where do you estimate that Baylor really is on those kind of preseason rankings?
I mentioned earlier about having so much youth last year. I think that they are in the higher aspect of if you're tiering them, BYU and Baylor are probably at the lower tier, right? But if you're tiering within the tiers, I think Baylor is at the upper level. I think Baylor has a lot of optimism because of all the youth coming back, all of the proven young talent that hopefully can take that next step. So I think I agree that they are low on the totem pole of predictions for preseason Big 12 stuff, but I think they're a little higher than they should be a little higher because there's so much, that potential, right? And that's not a very quantifiable stat. You can't really quantify potential, but I think Baylor has it in spades. And I think that, if they finish middle of the pack in the Big 12, I think that's exactly where they should be.
Who will be Baylor's starting quarterback when they line up against Tarleton on August 31st?
Oh, that's the $1 million question. I've been asking Dave Aranda that all spring, and he will not give me an answer.
That means he probably doesn't know either, right?
Yeah, well, I think there's some of that, but it's between Blake Shapen was a 2-year starter. He transferred out. He's at Mississippi State now. Utah last year saw Sawyer Robertson, who was a 4-star kid from Lubbock, who was started at Mississippi State, came to Baylor. He's kind of the incumbent. He's a gunslinger. He doesn't, he can chuck the ball really well. But they also brought in a guy, DeQuan Finn, from Toledo, who's he won the MAC MVP last year. He's got 1 year of eligibility left, and he can throw it as well. But he's a little bit more quick on his feet. He can run a little bit more. So I think DeQuan Finn is going to be the starter against Tarleton, just because, like I mentioned before, the offensive line has tons of questions. So it's whether it's him running for his life or Sawyer Robertson running for his life. I think DeQuan gives him a better chance to, actually maybe do something on the fly and kind of be creative on the fly. So I think it's going to be DeQuan Finn, but Dave Aranda is a mad genius, or so I hear, and Jake Spavital's new, so maybe he's got other plans. But if you ask me right now, I think DeQuan Finn, but we shall see.
Even just having a couple choices, I think having it whittled down to 2 makes BYU fans pretty jealous, just because they have like a 4 or 5 quarterback race, it feels like sometimes. Speaking of which, one of those guys is Gary Bohannon. He, of course, left for that 1 year at South Florida. Yeah, he ended up at BYU, and he's in that quarterback room. I don't know if he's the odds-on favorite to be the starter. I don't know what they've even got with a guy like him who had to basically rebuild that shoulder to be able to throw. So what does BYU have in that quarterback room with Gary Bohannon?
He did a lot of really good things here, and obviously it was a totally different situation with Matt Rule, who had a totally different style, and then Dave Aranda came in, and that was before I even started covering the team when he left. But I know that there was maybe some animosity there, but I think that Gary Bohannon is a very capable quarterback. He's a proven college quarterback, maybe not much more than that. And so, I think if you want someone who's going to maybe not the highest ceiling, but definitely not the lowest floor, that's the best way I would describe what Gary Bohannon gives you.
Those are not really like things you'd want to have describe your quarterback, though, right? Like, hey, not the highest ceiling, but not the worst you've ever seen either. You're like, oh no. All right, so from in that sense, as BYU and Baylor are going to face off against one another, another guy who used to be at BYU went to Baylor playing basketball is now at Utah on the football roster. Caleb Lohner, what can you tell us about the transition from Baylor basketball into Utah football now for the former basketball forward?
I mean, it's a crazy story. Like, I kind of came out of nowhere. Did you? Like, I didn't really understand. Like, I didn't really know I knew he wanted to transfer. I didn't know he wanted to play football, because trying to look back and see if he played high school football here in Texas. He's from the Dallas area, and obviously high school football in Texas is a kind of a monster of its own. But I couldn't find that he even played football in high school. And I know, So he's got the size, he's got obviously the athleticism to succeed as a tight end, but it's just an interesting transition. And oddly enough, he's definitely not the first Baylor basketball guy to transition to the football field. There's been a few others, most notably Rico Gathers. He was a 6th-round pick by the Cowboys, played for the Browns, played for the Cowboys, had a pretty long NFL career that he started as a Baylor basketball player. So I don't know what it is about maybe it's just the Texas high school football kind of ethos, but I expect him to succeed. Why wouldn't he? Because he's got the build, and Utah seems to have he seems to be a good Utah kid. Because, like you said, he played at BYU. He's all that. So it's great. I think it's really unique and really cool, and I think he's going to do great.
Besides DeQuan Finn transferring in at quarterback, what are some other transfer portal guys Baylor picked up that Utah and BYU fans should be aware of?
Oh, let's see here. Well, they've got a couple of wide receivers. I mentioned the offense is completely new. They're much more spread, lots of speed. The wide receiver room for Baylor, they brought back their top 7 receivers from last year. So they've got a ton of returning production, and they only added to that. They added Ashton Hawkins. He's a senior. He's coming up from Texas State. He actually was coached by Jake Spavital at Texas State. He's kind of a speedy slot guy that I expect to do a lot of big things in the slot. And then Jamal Bell, he's another smaller, speedy guy. He's, I think, the Nevada's all-time kick return yards leader. And, he's another one of those guys that kind of fits that up-tempo spread, making a lot of changes and bringing people in and out. So those are 2 receivers that I really think can make a huge difference and kind of stand out for Baylor offensively this year.
Well, it's going to be an interesting one. You've got University of Utah facing off against Baylor up here at Rice-Eccles Stadium, and then BYU heads down to McLean Stadium down there in Baylor at the end of September, on September 28th. So we're obviously very interested here. We appreciate it. Zach Smith, the Waco Tribune, here with us on the program. We appreciate it, Zach. We'll talk to you again.
Thank you very much.
There you go. Oh, it's a lot of I like the little double dip when we can dip in on a lot of different questions. And now that we kind of went through and asked all those questions. We're going to have a lot of those.
Well, because of the being in the same conference.
Well, and you think about the weird, like, Caleb Lohner intersection with BYU, Utah, and Baylor.
Yeah.
You think about the weird Jeff Grimes intersection, right? You think about the weird, both Utah and BYU both playing Baylor now. It's just Gary Bohannon from Baylor. It's just so many different weird storylines that intersect with the Baylor Bears this year. So it's crazy. But yeah, September 7th, Rice-Eccles Stadium. That might be a nice little wake-up call for the folks in Waco, because you come up here.
Oh boy,
Week 2 of the season.
Oof.
And just Utah. It's kind of nice because they're going to tune up for conference play against a conference opponent without having to be on the books.
And Utah was not pleased with their performance in Waco last year.
No.
And there's going to be a lot of dudes on that team, and some guys that didn't play last year, Cam Rising, Brant Keithy, that's their first really big test at home, and they're going to be looking to make a statement. It's going to be a team that's going to be ranked in the top 25, probably top 15, or if not higher. They're going to be ready to make a statement, and just absolutely boat racing Baylor, a team they struggled to beat last year, would be a big statement for the Utes. And Baylor, all we talked about, they don't even know who their quarterback is right now. You better know who your quarterback is when they come into the Rice-Eccles Stadium in Salt Lake City, because that's going to be a rough environment if you're not ready to go. And that could be an interesting game as far as how bad does Utah beat them, because Baylor's got some issues. And that's, if you lose your non-conference game to Utah, by 3-4 touchdowns, how do you convince your team that you have any chance in the Big 12 at that point? It's really tough to pick yourself up off the mat. So that's going to be a big challenge for Baylor to step up and be ready. While that's a non-conference game, that is a really, really tough non-conference game against a team that's going to be trying to make a statement at home.
Boy, what a hot, awful game that was, by the way. That Utah barely escaped.
100 degrees on the field.
It was
hotter on the turf.
Not a good Baylor team, and Utah struggled that day.
Oh, I mean, if it wasn't for that late rally there,
Nate Johnson, right?
Oh, but yeah, I mean that could have been. The wheels could have come off Utah far earlier than they kind of did at the end of the year.
All right, let's take a quick break. We'll come back. We've got more to go on the program. We'll be giving you those opponent previews throughout the rest of spring. Post-spring previews, and then, of course, when we get closer to the season, we'll chat with a lot of these same guys, kind of give the thoughts as to – because by then you'll have a quarterback, right? BYU will have a quarterback by then, right? Right? No, maybe not.
That's tough.
Baylor's like, we don't have a quarterback either. Can we just flip a coin? We'll just move right past that one? Figure it out? All right. Let's take a break. We'll come back. Let's chat some NBA playoffs on the way back. We've got a couple big games. Of course, Donovan Mitchell, his injury status has been determined for Game 4. He is out against the Celtics. We'll come back. We'll chat much, much more. Stay with us. 97.5 the KSL Sports Zone.